Hi everybody, my name is Ambika and in today's video, in today's lecture, I'm going to help you with the topic story writing. So I will give you certain tips which will genuinely going to help you, assist you while you're planning to write the stories. And as you all know, this is actually part of our CBSE curriculum also. So you can follow these rules, pattern these tips and you will write great stories. Now, before beginning with our topic, before directly diving deep into our topic, I want to talk about Unacademy a bit. So herein, if you have plans to go for any of those competitive exams, along with that, if you are there in school and you need assistance with your own classes, so you have to download this particular app because you can be guided, you can be helped with nation's best top educators, right? And along with that, you can get quizzes. If you have problem, any doubt with any specific topic, so you can directly have a connect with them and you can ask them, right? So plus you can actually, the benefit about this is that in our life we do want to go for those competitive exams, right? So there are like ample number of students already, so herein you'll get the same feel as there are many students who have already enrolled themselves, right? So you can be the one amongst the lot, and so please, for that you need to download the app Unacademy, and for that you can use my code AMBIKA just in case if you want the discount, and yes, you'll get a discount for it. So for that you have to use the code which is AMBIKA and enroll yourself. Now let's begin with the topic story writing. As you all know, whenever we watch movie, whenever we read something, there's a story behind it. And once you read it, once you see it, if it goes any which way, it keeps with you like throughout the time, right? So stories actually, they does create impact on us for a very long time. They stay with us, right? So that is the power of writing, of reading a story. Now, here we are on the other side of the table wherein we are planning to write a story. Right. So first of all, the question arises like, what is a story? A story is the narration of set of fictitious or factual events, often used to convey a message, narrate an event, or just create a particular mood. So that is what the role of a story is. They create such a fictitious world around us that we start believing in it. Right. There are two basic words which we use while discussing any of the stories or while writing also. They are utopia and dystopia. So utopia talks about everything which is perfect in all sense, which is like, which is actually impossible to achieve, right? And dystopia is exactly opposite of it, wherein everything is, all dismantled, everything is all, shattered, and they are not so perfect, right? So, for example, like today, our society, it's a clear example of a dystopic society, right? So that's how there are certain words which we need to come across if you're planning to write a story. So the next thing is, what are the different types of stories? Like there are varieties of stories. Let's just check it out in detail. What are they? The first one is epic. So epic is a body of text in which there are like many narratives, many stories are also going on, right? So they can be broken into smaller parts as well. For example, let's just consider Ramayana. Okay, so the main characters are the three. They are Ram, Sita, and Lakshman. Maybe four, Ravan, right? But then there is a story about Ahilya also, right? So there are certain characters which we can take out from the text itself, right? So there's a whole long narrative, and in which the smaller narratives are also going on. Next comes the fables. So fables are, all those Panchtantra stories which we used to read when we were kids, right? So therein you have got animals, like they feature into the story, and there we can also have those inanimated objects which can speak, right? So they are the clear example of fables. Folk tales are folklores which are prominent of a particular place, right? For example, a folklore of, let's just say Kashmir, a folklore of Rajasthan, right? So tales of a particular area, right? They're simply called as folk tales. Next is horror. I don't know. Do I need to explain this out? right? Horror stories. Next we have adventure stories. So adventure stories talks about, like one character goes for an adventure, right? To seek something new, to find something new, or simply on a drive or on a ride, right? So that is simply an adventure which gives excitement to the reader, the thrill to the reader. Next comes the myth. So myth talks about, like it is basically the fundamental reality of our society, right? Like how the main characters in the story in the myths are generally, I repeat, generally they are gods, they are demigods, right? So they are mythological or they are simply myths. Then comes fairy tales, so all our Cinderella, the every other beautiful story which had those characters which we read as we were kids. So they all fall under the category of fairy tales. Next comes the sagas. The sagas are the long narrative, and it basically talks about the heroic achievement of any of the characters, right? So many layers of stories are going on, and the end result is that there are many, I should rather say, there are many achievements of the characters, right, which takes place. Next come humorous stories, so which are funny, which are comical, right, which create fun at the end. They are called as humorous stories or humorous tales. Next is detective. Detective is right now I can simply recall of Sherlock Holmes, right? So wherein an incident take place and that is being dealt by the detective stories, like a detective. So like series of events take place, and one man who is a detective, he figures out what all has happened here, and then at the end they tell the culprit, right? So that is all about detective stories. So now when you get option, like what sort of story do you want to write, you can pick any from the lot. You can decide, like, do you want to write an epic? Do you want to write any of the fairy tales? Do you want to write sagas? Any humorous tale you want to add? That is completely your call. You have your own creative space, because how we're going to get this question exam, that there'll be certain dotted lines, like dotted certain hints will be given there, and on the basis of that you need to create your own story. The choice is yours. You can simply write the way you want. Now the features of the story. So how we are supposed to write a short story. We are simply talking about a short story here, right? So it is supposed to be brief and concise. It is not supposed to be lengthy because you are writing it for your exam, right? So it is supposed to be brief, right? And the story should be in such a way that it leaves behind a, an impression on the people out there, right? All those who are reading it, they should they should be affected by it. So that is the agenda of writing a beautiful story. Next comes personal experience of the writer. I mean, it is impossible to write about something keeping the content away from you. Like if you are the writer, there'll be certain reflection of your own personality in it. No matter how hard you try, but there'll be certain traits which you will going to write, and it is allowed. There's no problem writing in that way, right? Now, reproduces prior knowledge. Whatever we know, whatever we have learned till now, whatever we have seen, whatever we have heard till now. So all those prior knowledge can be used while writing the story, right? Next is the basic components of the story. So what are the basic components? And they are supposed to be there. Without any of it, it is actually difficult to understand any of the story, right? So what are those basic components? There is supposed to be a title. There is supposed to be a plot. Okay. Third one is the setting. Fourth is the characters. Next comes the theme of a story. Post that, hi Mukesh, how are you? Next comes the point of view, and most important from the lot is the language, right? So language needs I mean, it genuinely plays an important role while writing any piece of text, right? So let's discuss each one of it in detail now. Title needs to be catchy and interesting as it arouses the interest of the reader and gives a fine idea about the theme of the story. The title needs to be eye catchy. It is supposed to be so interesting, like, if somebody's passing through your own book and, the title should be something that they should stand there, they should check it out, like what it talks about. The title needs to be very interesting, as the first and the foremost thing about any text is the title. And the title also gives us the fine and the fair idea what the story will going to be all about, right? So title is the first and the most important part of the story writing. Next comes the plot. So the plot of a story is a planned series of events, like what will happen at what time, right? What will happen at the beginning, the middle, and the end, right? So the series of events, the series of actions, the sequence, right? That simply talks about the plot of the story. It tells the setting, background, and reveals all the important thing about the story. So in the plot only we come to know where the story is all being set, what is the background, right? So the plot is going to play an important role along with the title of the story. So this is how the plot is supposed to be. Exposition, then there'll be a rising action, post that the climax of the story, after that the falling action, and then the denouement. I'll tell you and we'll discuss in detail each one of it now. Exposition. So exposition introduces all the main characters, setting and the background. Right? So exposition is like, telling explicitly about your text in the beginning itself. You are revealing all the characters, maybe the major and the minor characters, all will be revealed. Right? The setting, the setting is here in India, in UK, in USA, maybe in a room, right? So herein you do need to describe the setting of the story. Next comes the background. The background will be that of the characters. You have to give a certain sort of background of each of the characters, right? Like in which family they were born, or what happens like after a particular situation. So you do need to clarify everything in the beginning itself. Now next comes the rising action. So it starts with the introduction of the conflict. For example, now from here the actual story will begin, right? From the rising action, like what is the major, what about what the whole story is there for, right? So the introduction of the major conflict, the problem will be discussed after the exposition of the characters, like what the story is all about, right? Next is the climax. So climax is like the turning point of the story. Maybe some revelation has took place, or some fight has taken place. So that is simply the climax of the story, the important turning point in any of the story. Next is the falling action. Now falling action simply talks about the resolvement, like how things resolve with time, right? First, there needs to be a certain sort of, exposition. You are simply telling what the story is all about, how many characters are there, the major characters, the minor characters, the setting of the story. Next comes, now you are building up your story. Rising action takes place wherein you are simply telling the people out there loud that this is the problem, and this is the problem about which the whole story will going to revolve around, right? Next comes the climax. So here the story will reach to its epitome, right? And here the problem of the story will be revealed. Like the turning point will be there at the for the climax. Next is the falling action. So here gradually the story will going to fall in bits and pieces, in a way that it is trying to, like, all the pieces are trying to reconnect. So the problem will be resolved during this time of the story. Next comes denouement. So denouement is the final confrontation between the protagonist and the antagonist. The protagonist is somebody around whom the story revolves. It is need not supposed to be simply a hero, right? It can be heroine, it can be anybody around which the whole story revolves. That is simply called as the protagonist. Next is antagonist, that is the villain of the story. So here there'll be a final confrontation between the protagonist and the antagonist, and the decision will be there. The final outcome of the event will be then, here, now, right? So that is how we are supposed to follow each one of it in detail. We have to keep this in mind. Next comes the conflict. So without conflict, there'll be no plot. There is supposed to be some problem. There is supposed to be, certain kind of tragedy. There's supposed to be some sort of story, right? So that story which we call is simply called as the conflict of the story. Now, conflict can be further divided into two parts, that is internal conflict and external conflict. So, internal conflict is all about the conflict which is there with the person himself. Like, there is some problem with the character himself. External can be a problem with the nature, maybe with the environment, or it can be with any of the demons, it can be from with any other character, any other man, right? So these simply will be called as the conflict, and they will be categorized as the external conflict. Next comes the setting of the story. So it talks about where the story takes place. So as you all know, setting simply means where the story is taking place. Is it like simply on planet Earth, maybe some other planet, or in any of the foreign lands, maybe some imaginary island, some imaginary place, maybe a room, right? So herein, setting means where exactly the story is taking place. Next comes the time. So when the story is all set, like maybe during the times of rains, or maybe in a summer, winter, maybe in 1916 or 1847, any year, you have to keep in mind like which year you are setting up your whole story, right? Next comes the mood. So the mood talks about what feelings are being created in the beginning, middle, and end of the story. If you are writing a cheerful story, if you're writing a humorous story, you need to keep that in mind that there's supposed to be humor throughout the story, right? Next comes the characters. So thoughts and actions of the characters should be engaging. Whatever thoughts are there, whatever actions you want the character to perform, they should be so engaging. They should be so gripping. Like the people do not leave the story in between. The characters need to be promising. They should appeal to the people. People should feel that we can connect with the reader. If, for example, if the if the pet of the character dies, so it should be presented in such a way that all the people who are reading it, they should be affected by it, right? So one need to feel connected with your character. You need to make your character, you need to develop your story, your character in such a way that the readers do feel connection with each one of the characters. If something happens bad with your character, the reader should feel that pain, right? So that is how we can write great stories. Now there are various ways like how you should reveal your character. So by simply describing that is how he used to dress up, that is how his behavior was, or how he or she used to think, how basically the basic the fundamental reality of that character needs to be discussed, right? Next comes the theme. So, as I have already told you, there is supposed to be a proper theme in your story. It should not be something like you have begun in a very humoristic way and then it is going all of a sudden in a very romantic genre. It's picking up and then you have changed into a very sad story and suddenly there's a detective touch to it. No, there's supposed to be a proper theme, right? For example, you are talking about divine things. Maybe you're talking about, let's just say knowledge, right? You're simply talking about connectivity, right? You're simply talking about patriotism. So these are the basic themes on which your story, if you are picking up that story, if you're picking up that theme, so stick to it. Next is narration. So the story can be narrated in different ways. There can be multiple narrators, like the same story can be narrated from different point of views, right? So we can say that there is a multiple. This is a multiple narrative story, right? Next comes wherein the author is himself writing, right? The author is the author and the narrator are the same, right? Or we can simply say that the author is writing with I, the pronoun I. So there can be different ways how you can begin with your story, how you can begin with the narration of your story. Next comes the language. The whole idea of writing any piece of literature, of any piece of writing, is about language, right? So what is the use of language? Because with language you express your views, right? You express your ideas to the other person, right? So language needs to be very flowery. Language is supposed to be something, it should be presented in such a way that each one of us should feel connected with it, right? So authors can use irony, they can use metaphor. Metaphor simply means comparison between things, right? Simile, liken as, right? So that is a clear example of simile. Next comes personification. So personification, as you all know, giving humanly attributes to animated or to non-human things, right? Alliteration, you all know, that is simply a way of writing your own text, right? Now, there are certain tips which you need to follow, as I've already told you in the beginning, in the commencement of my own video, that I'll give you certain tips which you need to keep in mind while writing up the text. So, sketch the plot clearly in your mind. First of all, frame the whole story in your own mind. Like, what will be the beginning, how will the story proceed, and how it will end. So, this is supposed to be very much clear in your own mind, first of all. Now whatever points, whatever options are being given there at the top, you need to follow them, right? Follow each of the pointers which are being given there, and you need to revolve, you need to make your story adjacent to it, right? And insert dialogue, give dialogues to your characters in such a way that they feel connected with it, right? The dialogue should be very engaging. Now, the marking scheme of our story writing is it is divided into basically three parts. The content will be of 6 marks. Fluency, like how it is being mentioned, the words, the grammatical thing will be there for 2 marks, and accuracy of the content will be there, and that will going to carry 2 marks. That will all going to make 10 marks. Now, here I have got one sample for you, and we'll try to solve it together, right? The question is, I got up in the middle of the night. I was sweating profusely. Complete the story in 150 to 200 words. So that is all we have got as a hint, and we have to use this hint to carry the story, to make the story move ahead. Now, the title of the story, as I have already told you, is supposed to be there. So the title of this story is A Narrow Escape. And the story goes from here, right? It says, I got up in the middle of the night. I was sweating profusely. I switched on the light only to find that there was some kind of electricity failure. I came out of the room to get some fresh air. It was stormy outside, and that might have been the reason for the electricity failure. I drank cold water, took a chair, and sat in the veranda. Suddenly, I heard a loud shriek. It was coming from a neighbor's house. I was so confused. Now, what to do? Then I gathered courage and went inside to fetch a torch. I took the torch and started moving towards my neighbor's house. I peeped inside from the window and saw two people who were covering the owner at gunpoint. I stepped back and started thinking of my next step. At that moment, I heard a motorbike approaching near. It was Cobra police on their patrolling. I signaled to them. They stopped and asked me the reason for stopping them. I told them the whole story. They immediately went inside to help the old couple. The miscreants were shocked at the sudden arrival of the police. They tried to escape, but the policemen took prompt action and caught them. We heaved a sigh of relief. Suddenly, the whole area was illuminated as the power supply was resumed. The old couple saw me and thanked me for my sharp wittedness. Right? So that is how you're supposed to write a story which is meant to be very engaging. The reader should feel connection. The reader should feel some thrill while reading up your story. All right. Here goes the next story. That is sample 2. Write a story in about 150 to 200 words on the basis of the given outline. Right? So we already have got the outlines here and we have to write a story on the basis of that. The illiterate boy caught for pickpocketing, sent to juvenile prison, forced to do lessons, becomes sullen rebellious, watches French comic film on TV during recreation hours, fascinated with the language, requested coaching classes, a French tourist guide today. Right? So that is all. That is all the hint which we have got. And now we have to make the story ahead. We have to take the story from here. Or you can simply, fill up those gaps also. The title of the story is Man, the Master of His Own Destiny. Right? Okay, now the story begins. Raju was a little boy who was born in a poor family. He wanted to get education, but his financial condition did not allow him to do so. He remained illiterate and so did not have any means of earning. He took to pickpocketing and small thieves. One day, he was caught red-handed for pickpocketing. Since he was only 13, he was sent to juvenile prison where he was forced to do lessons. He had no interest in them, and the compelling behavior of the prison people made him sullen and rebellious. It was only during the recreation hour that he seemed to be his normal self. One day, he, sorry, I missed the line, I believe. Yes, he was, it was only during the recreation hour that he seemed to be his normal self. One day, he watched a French comic film on TV. He was fascinated with the French language and wanted to learn it. He requested the prison authorities for coaching classes in French. They agreed to his proposal as they were themselves interested to make him learn something so as to be self dependent. Raju showed a keen interest in learning the language and in a very short period had acquired a mastery over the language. Raju was set free after 2 years. He had already decided to use the French language as his means of earning. He became a French tourist guide and started leading an honorable life. He forgot all about his past and is happy these days for this sudden but positive turn in his life. He has set an example for others that man is a master of his own destiny. Right? So you have to justify the title of your story in the story which you are writing. Right? So I hope we all are very much clear with how we are supposed to write a story. And these tips which I have just shared with you all, they will going to help you in writing a beautiful story. So go for it, try it hard, and yes, do write a beautiful story. All the best for that. With that, I'm signing off. And as I've already told you, you need to enroll yourself with Unacademy. And if you will going to use my code, which is AMBIKA, you will get a discount for it. So go for it and let's crack the difficult thing about CBSE, which is studying itself. So go for it, guys, and do it.